going on. Trump's talking about delaying the election. There's a lot going on. COVID-19, folks are being evicted from their homes. We have a lot of issues in America right now, people, that we need to tackle that are ravaging communities. Poor people are continue to suffer. Our elderly are getting sick, facing COVID-19. We got a lot to tackle. And so we are going to hear from United States presidential candidate from an independent standpoint, Jade Simmons, an African-American woman. How many African-American women have been bold enough to step out there? And to step out there in the independent standpoint, not just as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but independently to stand up. I told her before, as we talked a few minutes ago, that I think she will inspire young people, inspire young women to do the same. So let me bring Jade into this conversation as well. Jade Simmons, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Damien Jones podcast.
Damon, thank you for having me, for making space for my voice. I'm really thankful for the opportunity.
Absolutely. We are so blessed to sit down and talk with you. You are the first presidential candidate ever to sit down on this broadcast. So we are so grateful and so thankful for you and all that you bring to the table. And we are so grateful and thankful to see a sister deciding to lift her voice and to be so bold and to be so courageous to run to take a seat in the Oval Office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Folks, make sure you are sharing this broadcast, liking this broadcast, bring more people into the room so we can hear from Jade Simmons, to understand her platform, to understand what it is she wants to do for the American people. So Jade, just tell us, who is Jade Simmons and how did we get to this place?
Wow, loaded question, right? Probably need an hour just to unpack that by itself. But the way I've been describing it in a nutshell is, I've lived a lifestyle of reinvention. And if I look back at it, whenever the transformation was required, it was always about how do you have more impact, not only in the circle you're already in, but how do you have broader impact? And as a professional speaker, as an artist, as a minister, one of the things I'm always talking about, preaching or teaching or writing, is that when you see voids and you find yourself always saying, why won't somebody do something? And you're coming up with all these creative solutions. They need to do this and they should do that. At some point, you have to stop and actually listen to yourself and ask yourself, wait a minute, do I have the varying experiences required for this moment to be able to lean into this void powerfully? It's not always going to look like the experience everybody expects of you.
Yeah.
But you can't go by what's already been done before. You have to say, if we're in an unlikely time, is unlikely leadership required? And might I toss my hat in the ring to offer something that Americans will find powerful? And the answer was yes. And that's how we got here. That's the nutshell of it. I know we'll break it down as we go on.
Yeah. No. But you just started us off with a great line here. And folks, as you have questions and comments for Jade, drop them in the chat and we'll get to some of those questions and comments as well. And if this is your first time watching, folks, thank you for joining us. Give us a thumbs up. If you are a regular viewer, you know how we do. Thank you for being here. Give us a hard thumbs up. Let us know in the comments that you are here. Brenda Sanders, thank you so much for being with us. But you just talked about it, Jade. You just said that there are times those of us that care about our community. And I think that's everybody. Those that are active, those that want to see change, those that look at the world and say, we need to make some tweaks here. But then we also say, this person's not doing it right. This person's not leading right. Right. And so we have to step into that void and not be a keyboard gangster, not just be an armchair quarterback and Monday morning quarterback, but jump in there and be a change maker. And you're saying that's what you wanted to do by stepping into this role.
And it's, you're a strategist, you're a consultant, it's not a reckless move you make. You have to be able to do some math, you have to do some calculations, and you have to weigh the moment. And you have to check the atmosphere. And there were two things, I've been saying this over and over, that were kind of the precipitating factors for me and my family. This is something my family have been discussing for a while. We honestly thought, Damien, that this was going to be something I would do down the road. And as a strategic person, I wanted to plan that out a certain way and make certain moves. But you know how it is. Your plans can often be interrupted by what the moment requires. And there were two
right.
things that I sensed were on the horizon. This was starting since about 2015. But at the end of 2019, I was sensing we were coming into a moment where we were going to have race relations were going to be at an all-time low. I'm the daughter of a civil rights activist from Charleston, South Carolina. Okay. And so speaking in terms of race, racial unrest, it's like a second language for me. I'm comfortable with it. I enjoy the opportunity to have difficult conversations and come up with incredible creative outcomes. So, but I felt like we were on the verge of race relations being at an all-time low. Silly me, I thought that was just because of the state of politics today, that we'd be talking about this because of the hyper divisive culture we're in right now. I also thought we were coming up into a season where the economic disparity was at an ungodly stretch. The gap is it's inhumane at this point. And I felt like we were coming into a season where the inequalities would be exposed and exacerbated. I'd be lying to you if I told you I knew COVID-19 was going to do what it did. I'd be lying to you if I told you I knew the death of yet another Black man at the hands of law enforcement was going to do this, because we've seen those things before. The difference with George Floyd, this time we couldn't look away. We didn't have anywhere to be. Didn't have to take little Johnny to soccer practice and say, oh, isn't that tragic, and keep moving. We could not keep moving. So when you talk about the moment, you now have universal buy-in. Come on, universal buy-in that, first of all, systemic injustices exist. You know, come on, we're finally admitting that. But I didn't know that on January 1st when I decided the time to run was now. And so those two things continually affirm the decision we made to step into the gap now, because I feel uniquely qualified to communicate us through this era and to also creatively come up with solutions that require collaboration like never before. And we have to have leadership now that's going to prioritize people once and for all.
Yeah. So let me ask you just a few questions quickly. How young are you?
I love it. I'm 42 years young. I love it.
Wow. Well, yeah, my mom told me many years ago, she said, never ask a woman how old she is. And so I just got clever and just asked how young are you.
That's good. And I wouldn't have been offended if you'd asked it the other way. I think age is a powerful thing. There's so many who don't have the blessing of waking up each morning. And so we're still here. So I celebrate my age. I'm 42.
Right. No, and you just talked about, I mean, so you live in Houston, in the Houston area, in the state of Texas, you and your family, your husband and so forth. But you are from South Carolina.
That's right.
Wonderful state. I mean, one of the states I think is so beautiful. I've been about 3 times. I've been to Beaufort. I've been to Charleston. So beautiful as you move throughout the terrain. Yeah. You talked about being from the lineage of a civil rights leader.
That's right.
Kind of talk about that impact and how that has helped you move in your life, and how it's inspired you in this role.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting growing up in Charleston, because people always say it's so beautiful there and it's gorgeous, and we were at the market and we visited the plantation. So it's like this bittersweet beauty, right? Where if you don't live here, if you were not from there, you can come in. It's one of the #1 tourist destinations right now in the world. You're going to see it on HGTV and home in the Cooking Network just about every day. But as you get older, you realize the complication of the city's history. Right. I mean, it's a major slave port. I'm a classical musician. My original trade, I say, before my first iteration and evolution. And it's the home of the scene of Porgy and Bess, one of the most famous operas, African-American operas of all time. Yet, you know, the place carries its own dark history. And 5 years ago now, it was the place of the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church.
Right.
You know, my father did something radical. I mean, he's still the guy you're going to find literally on the streets with the posters protesting. We have a Confederate group that comes out every Sunday, and he meets them where they are. When my mother was working in higher education at the Citadel Military College, who was notorious for still playing Dixie, my father would be protesting outside of the school. So you're talking about someone who has lived in the middle of all of these arguments for her entire life. Both of my parents were active, in the movement and these things. So I grew up being well versed on on race and on civil rights. My father took me to KKK rallies when I was young. He wanted me to see what that looked like when hate was taught, when hatred was taught. And the opposite of that is, if you can teach hate, you must also be able to teach everything else. This is a moment now where our leader must also be a teacher, must be a coach, must be a translator, an interpreter, and they must do it from a heart that is bent on restoration and reconciliation. They can't be looking to stir up the division to serve re-election. And they can't be pandering just to attain power. This has to be, this is paradigm shifts are what are required, Damien. And so I feel like my entire life has prepared me to be able to speak into this moment powerfully. But as you know, the president's not just the chief communicator, which I think will be the #1 trait required, but they also have to make powerful decisions. And so we have to ask ourselves now, where's the root of our leaders' decision making? We know the president is always going to, his root's always going to be personal agenda and profit. It's always going to serve corporations first.
Shouldn't be, but we know that's what it
shouldn't be, but that's what it's going to be. And it yields a certain fruit. But in this season, the fruit that's required must be able to feed all Americans, especially the ones who are coming out of COVID-19 suffering greatly. So it's a new era that requires a new lane of leadership. And so that's why I'm coming to you, not ashamed that I have not held political office, because I believe the last thing we need is politics as usual right now.
I agree. Listen, I don't think that's an issue that you've never held political office. I know there are folks watching and folks across this country who don't want the same status quo. They don't want the same career politicians. They don't want the same old same. They don't want the folks who are in the back rooms making the deals that don't benefit the everyday people. So I think it's a breath of air. I mean, say what you did.
It is, but remember, Damien, the president himself ran on not being a politician and largely was elected because of that outsider status. But what we have to ask ourselves, people should be rightly concerned now, like, wait a minute, we get another novice in office here. His issues, if you take issue with the president, if you made a list of the top 5 things that bother you about him and the way that he leads, not having political experience wouldn't even make the top 5. I don't think it'd make the top 10. The issue, that's a good point. That's a good point. And you think about the leaders that we've loved. You don't love them because they were great politicians. You love them because you trusted the heart of their leadership. You trusted their character. If you don't like someone, it's because of the same thing. You don't trust their leadership. You don't trust their character. So we're asking people, yes, first of all, I want American voters to be more skeptical. We've gotten too used to people just kind of telling us what we want to hear, right? And reciting back their talking points.
We need to dig into the details.
I love that you said, listen, she's a Black woman. She's going to inspire a lot of young girls that look like me. And I'm here for all of that. But I always say, do not stop at the melanin. Please dig deeper than that. I think both parties have been able to woo us at a surface level. If you're Christian, you must be Republican. If you're really Black, you must be Democrat. If you're pro-life, you must be here. And those labels in and of itself have kept us, and they're phony labels, because most people we're plaid. We're not red, blue. Listen, most of us are plaid to some degree, right? We might lean conservative personally, but we love somebody who might be considered more liberal.
Right.
We might be passionate about life, but our best friend may have had an abortion, right? So because of those differences, we as humans are more nuanced. Why aren't our politics representative of that nuance that we have in our own lives?
Well, I think you make a great point. It is those labels. It is those partisan affiliations. It is those things that divide this country. We are more divided now than I've ever seen in my 35 years on this earth. And we have to find places where we have commonality. We shouldn't be defined and walk into a room and say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I mean, that shouldn't define who we are as a person. It doesn't.
And it doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah. And we should define ourselves by, hey, I'm Damien Jones. I'm Jade Simmons. I stand for X, Y, and Z. That is how we should identify ourselves. But particularly, I have to ask this. You are running as a presidential candidate as an independent. Why?
That's right. Well, because of what you just said. So there's personal conviction in there. There's also strategy in there. Let me tell you why. So personally, I have always been an independent. If you go back and pull up my voting record, you're going to see me vote all over the place because balance is key.
Yeah.
If you are in a negotiating room and everybody in that room, you're planning policy, legislation, and you all speak the same, you all care about the same demographic, and you leave that room all patting each other on the backs, you can guarantee large swaths of people were just underserved. We now have to have leadership that is independent minded, but represents different groups of people. You have to have representation in the room. And so one of the reasons that I run strategically as an independent is so that you don't have to worry, who is she really doing this for? What strings are really attached? You know, Vice President Biden, as he runs, he got some political favors to pay back.
Absolutely.
We also don't really know, we haven't heard from him. We don't really know who's strategizing his policies. If you go look on OperationRestoration2020.com, people say, why do you take so long to roll out policy? Because I'm writing them. And because we are being informed by the people who would be affected by the policy. We don't put out policy on education until we've been in rooms with actual educators, parents, students, principals who tell us, here's what current policy does to us, here's what we need. And then in my own words, I sit down and write that policy so that I'm never reciting back to you something I had to memorize that was given to me by a pollster that some random think tank thought up. We want policy that is powered by the people. And so we strategically, I'm independent so that Americans can finally breathe easy and not wonder whose side I'm on. We now need a president whose mission is to serve as many people as possible, whose base is the American people in general. People say that's hard to do. It's not as hard when you realize I believe the majority of Americans right now are politically homeless and do not strongly identify with Biden or with Trump. Now, the ones who love them, I'm riding with Biden.
That. Politically homeless. I like that.
Politically homeless. A lot of people feel that way. And it's because over our kitchen tables, we have these nuanced conversations. We find common ground. And we don't throw food at each other and throw water in each other's faces. We get up, loving each other, having these great conversations, agreeing to disagree on certain things. And that's not what we see in politics. So Americans are like, listen, I got some issues I need solved. And watching these two parties play ping pong all day. We're the table, by the way. They're playing ping pong. We're the table getting beat up on every time. And the stalemates never serve us. And so this is a season to have what I call a palate cleansing presidency. You don't have to worry whose side is she really on. You're not worrying about, I'm not worried about re-election because the people re-elect what's working for them. Not worried about it. I just got to get in there and serve as many people as possible.
Yeah. So folks, keep your questions coming. I see your questions. We're going to start getting to some of those questions right now. But now I want to, you set the table, you told us who you are and kind of some of the things you stand for. Kind of talk to us about your vision for America, Jade.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some of these questions come in too. So I'll work to even answer some of them in these questions that you're asking me, Damien. So overall, when we started out, we felt like the thrust of the conversation needed to be about restoration. What does it look like to restore America to its original ideals? It's funny, you know, we're good with messaging. America, we can come up with some slogans and we've got some great taglines, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. But have we ever really looked like those things? So it's funny, people are afraid that new leadership is looking to make America something it's not. My job, I believe, is to get us to finally be what we've always been saying we were. And so part of that has to be, there has to be room for access to opportunity for every American. I can't promise the outcomes, right? I can't promise what you're going to do with the opportunity, but the least I can do is assure that you have unfettered access to a place where you can provide more for your families, live a healthy, happier life, not be at greater risk of dying from COVID-19 than the average person, right? Be able to have funding to help your small business prosper and make sure that in something like COVID-19, we aren't seeing the disparities exacerbated. So access to opportunity for all, we do that by way of, first of all, dealing with systemic injustices. Again, I didn't know we were going to be talking about that after George Floyd. We were still trying to get people to believe there was such a thing. right? And also
maybe it was a perfect storm. They kind of helped put it in folks'
storm.
faces. Yeah,
it's a perfect storm. Educational reform is going to be key, and economic reform. So we're looking at economic reform, education reform, and you have to have law enforcement and criminal justice reform in order to create a society that functions for more people. And here's what's exciting. My friends who get worried about things like a revolution, paradigm shift. You see, even Pete Buttigieg messed that word up. Remember in the debates when he said, we can't have the nostalgia of Trump or the revolution of Bernie Sanders. He took us back like 100 years with that statement. Revolution is the driving force of American culture.
Of change.
You can go back to you can go to the Boston Tea Party. Listen, it is part of our history. We use revolution every time we need to course correct. It has been bloody in the past. Here's the good news. We don't have to have a bloody revolution now because the blood has been spilt. Mm-hmm. George Floyd's blood has already been spilt. Civil War era blood has been spilt. When we landed here and did what we did to the Native Americans, the blood has already been spilt. So we have the luxury now of starting from a place of solutions, reform, and shifting. So that's what I'm excited to be putting into place.
Absolutely. Laying out this vision, folks. We're having an incredible chat with U.S. presidential independent candidate, Mrs. Jade Simmons, just kind of laying out her vision for America. But you talked about that blood being spilled, but we also know that blood is on the hands of folks like Governor Greg Abbott. We know that blood is on the hands of President Donald Trump and those who are not handling this COVID-19 pandemic in an efficient way. We see some governors, Brian Kemp in Georgia and other places, not handling this thing as efficiently as one could. What is your plan?
Well,
you're elected to the Oval Office to get this COVID-19 pandemic under control and where the American people feel safe to go back to work, to put food on the table, and just to go about everyday life. What's your plan?
Okay, first of all, my role here is to call truth to power on both sides of the aisle. All right. So you named many Republican governors who didn't do as many of us thought they should have in terms of really containing COVID-19. I also believe there's blood on blue hands as well, because as the presidential debates and things were going on and everybody was busy running for president, many of them knew about COVID-19 as early as January. And it wasn't a big issue. The media has blood on its hands. I've been following COVID-19 since the beginning of December. Our American media did not bother to cover it until it was a worthy news story. The impeachment took priority in the media back then. So I've been covering it since we knew China was doing some crazy stuff back in November and December. Also, we as American people have blood on our hands. Those of us who have fought the effort to make personal sacrifices, we have played a role in sacrificing the lives of others. So I like to get everybody on common ground here, right? Get us all weighed in, bought in. So now you talk about solutions. Well, I'll go on record. I've been on record as saying we reopened way too soon. And it wasn't because I don't want to reopen. My entire revenue stream is based on large conferences and gatherings. So the minute COVID hit, my business was shut down. So listen, if anybody was eager to get back to work, it would be me. But I didn't want to do that at the risk of the audiences that I serve and my team as well. So here's what should have happened and what I would have done. Brenda asked what would I have done differently. So I believed even if we had stayed shut down one more month through June, we would have a much better situation now. What we could have done was that time could have been used to get more testing capability. When we reopened, we were able to test 150,000 a day. When the experts were saying we shouldn't reopen until we could test 500,000 a day, we reopened too soon. My prediction was that we would be faced with a resurgence that would come around the time of the end of summer going into the election season, and that it would be harder to get the American people, after we've been itching to get out in the first place, it was going to be harder to get us to shut down again. It would create even more economic turmoil. That's where we are. What I will do in the first 100 days, they always talk about those 100 days. First of all, those can't be a vanity project. 100 days can't be a vanity project.
Sometimes it is. It's the first 100 days I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
No. The 100 days should be determined by what has happened in the quarter before. So here's the thing. If COVID-19 is better under control, if the spread is contained, we get to focus on jobs. And that's where we want to be. And we'd have to now talk about creating jobs, because reopen too soon. What happened is we lost some jobs permanently. There are some jobs that are not coming back. We're walking around here in Arkansas and seeing businesses that have been shuttered permanently.
Shuttered all across this country.
All gone. Twitter.
From it. Right.
Twitter got out and said, hey, not having this overhead is kind of nice. We're not going back to what we were doing. So Twitter shut it down. They're all now working remotely. You got a skyscraper building they were using that's no longer in need. So who lost their jobs there? Janitors, the people who were cleaning the building. Did they have a cafeteria? Those workers are gone. Was vending machines in the building? Those business owners are shuttered. Do you see? So we cost ourselves actual jobs that will not come back, which means at the beginning of the year, if we have not, if we have contained the spread, we're going to have to create new jobs. I think we're going to be doing stuff like in the Rooseveltian era, Damien, where we have to have now government jobs that maybe are testing and tracing, because we didn't do that the first time. So I see us bolstering the public health departments and hiring people who were fired or let off during COVID-19. They'll be the first people to have to be in line to get jobs, where we're going to need people to be tested and traced. Think about the new era we're going into. You're going to go to a job interview and they're going to say, when's the last time you tested negative for COVID-19?
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be a whole new industry.
I don't even know if we go to a job interview. All interviews may be just like what you and I are doing. They just be virtual.
They may be virtual. So a lot of the funding that the government is going to need to provide will be to help many businesses translate themselves into powerful virtual versions of themselves. I think we are going to need more public health jobs. And I think we can look to third world countries, believe it or not, to see them hire their own people in their own communities to help deal with these epidemics and pandemics. If we have not contained the spread, the first 100 days will be devoted to what I call ongoing emergency preparation. We need to be building new stock houses. We should never again have to turn to China, source of the initial virus, and Mexico for PPE for our own people. That's ridiculous. Why do we have to do that? Because American jobs are abroad. We don't have enough American companies right here manufacturing. So our American companies had to go to their offshores sites to give us the PPEs. Imagine how many new jobs if the companies we bailed out, if a part of that agreement, which should have been mutually beneficial and wasn't, we bailed them out and that was it. The payback should have been, hey, we need you to build a new company shoreside, a new manufacturing
here.
States. Our president campaigned on bringing American jobs back. But what most of his base doesn't know is that behind the scenes, he signed into law tax bills that incentivize companies to stay abroad and keep their profit abroad. Listen, you can no longer have a president, and this will tell you, your leader, you want to know not just their view of the nation, but how do they see you? If you are only a tool for election and for the attainment of power, you can bet that you will always be gambled away in the worst times possible. So here we are needing American jobs, and there he was behind Americans' back signing into law ways to keep American jobs abroad. So I think we now have to have leadership that we know sees us as valuable, as resources, as human resources, and sees us worthy of being served, whether or not it's an election year or not.
So let me say this. What's your website, Jade, just as well, so folks can know?
Thank you. You can hear more about policy at operationrestoration2020.com. We believe we are part of restoring the nation. There's been the cultural and spiritual and economic threads we've been ripped to shreds here over the last few years. And so that's why we really harp on this concept of restoring certain things. So, that's our handle as well for Facebook and Twitter, Operation Restoration 2020. And Twitter, I'm actually at Jade Simmons.
So talk to us, Jade, about, and you mentioned, I wrote down some of the tenets that you kind of talked about you want to attack. Talk to us about this criminal justice system that is decrepit, that leans toward targeting folks of color, that tears apart families year after year after year, mandatory minimums by way of Joe Biden. Texas, where we're sitting, has the largest penal system in the world, right? But this has been designed and targeted to take out African Americans and our Hispanic brothers and sisters. As the next president, what is your plan to tackle this large albatross that is really dividing and tearing apart America?
Yeah, what I think is really important is right now, that's the trendy discussion, right? George Floyd lent us a moment here, and we're now focused on policing and law enforcement reform as we should be. What we did on our website is we actually went a different route and launched first. Well, first of all, we unapologetically believe that any president should be a president for all cultures. This is a nation that has an amazingly colorful tapestry, and the president should pledge to do that. I don't think we have that in our current president. I think the president also shouldn't just serve the states that voted for him and the people who line up with him politically, but unapologetically, I would also be a champion for the underserved. And there are many underserved communities. The primary underserved community is the African-American community. So when you go to my website, you'll see a section called Shades of Breakthrough. And we launched with Breakthrough for Black America. You'll also see Breakthrough for small business owners, for immigrants, for Native Americans, for women, for children. But we launched with Breakthrough for Black America unapologetically. And one of the things that we believe is you got to have a three-pronged approach. You have to, of course, address law enforcement and criminal justice reform.
Absolutely.
Simultaneously, you must address education. Simultaneously, you must address economics. Just so happens that formula works for everybody.
Because you're saying all of those things, all those things affect everybody, and all those things work together. If one is off, the others will falter as well eventually. Correct.
Right. But what we did was unapologetically talk about specifically addressing the needs of African Americans. So you'll see me talk about a new Marshall Plan. Come on, in the 40s, we went over to Western Europe, spent $12 billion helping them recover after the devastation of the war. We invested in another nation in that way. So here we are. It's time now to invest. Brenda was asking about reparations. I look at it in a much bigger picture than that, Brenda. I talk about restitution. So I talk about educational reform, but to go strictly to your question about law enforcement reform, there's some basic things we got to do. You have to end qualified immunity. Because listen, you pose the question in a way that the president would love, because he would take what you said, reinterpret it, and translate it to his base as they're coming for you. They want to get rid of law and order, and they're coming for you. They want to dismantle the police. Strategically speaking now, we must begin to elevate our communication. When we talk about defunding the police, which you will never see that hashtag on any of my timelines, you hear me talk about improving crisis intervention.
So you don't agree with defunding the police?
No, here's what I believe. I believe you need the reallocation of funds. It's the same thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But you understand, one instantly gets hijacked. One phrase instantly gets hijacked and used against you. And what happens? The two parties start going back and forth. We, the ping pong table, don't get served. You must have a reallocation of funds. And guess who agrees with that? Police officers. They say, listen, so much of my time, I'm on calls that don't really require me. There was an incredible case where a man was threatening his own life, but he had a weapon. So the police were called because he had a weapon. There were other people in the home. The police come. On site was also a social worker. The social worker was given time to talk the man down, right? The police stood back, was given time to talk the man down. EMT was on site. They figure out what his meds were, give him meds on the spot, also give the man a sandwich so he could get his equilibrium back together. That situation was de-escalated. More money and time needs to be going into de-escalation training. The same time, I saw a video of a white guy who got out of a car at a traffic stop and beat down the female and the male cop. All of them were white. He beat them with their own baton. They never once even tased the guy. He gets up, tackles them both to the ground, gets in their car, drives off in the police cruiser. They never even tase them. Their hand never goes to their gun. That's a disparity that goes all the way back to how we're trained, how people are seeing African Americans. And so we're talking about not just a systemic racism issue. This is a systemic heart issue. So qualified immunity. We also have to make it much easier for police forces to fire their own. If you talk to good police officers, they will say nobody hates a bad cop worse than a good cop. And when we let bad cops off the hook, when we don't go in and dismantle the good old boy system, we do good cops a disservice. So those of you who believe we must support the police, we must support the police. We must not support disparities in how police address the calls that they go on. I think you also need to look at, it's a little radical, but New Jersey did this, and I think it was to great effect. What they did was wipe the slate clean. You got to come back and get rehired. We don't have any checks and balances within the system to see how are we still doing. Are you still a good cop? What are the marks against your record here? Have we addressed those? You look at Derek Chauvin. That man had numerous marks on his record. Now you think about the guys who were with him in the George Floyd incident, and people say, well, they were racist too. Not so fast. Ask yourself this. What would make those guys stand by? What else aside from racism? Well, a friend of mine said, well, you know what they had to think about was if this guy here, who's the head cop in charge, has gotten off 14 plus times previously and nobody's done anything. If I step in, when I call for backup on my next call, are my boys in blue coming for me?
Going to help me. Yeah.
Listen, so that means there's a good old boy network that must be dismantled. We must see harsher penalties. I think we also need to look at pensions being a part of the consequences that are taken away.
Pensions away. Yeah.
Those cops, many of them are you will have people who will say, listen, we know police officers who are staying in a little bit too long to make sure they reach a certain level and get that pension, but maybe they no longer have passion for the job. Here's another solution I'll end with that I don't think people are talking much about. People love the idea of free college, right? Listen, as soon as you say free college, you polarize everybody who believes you shouldn't have nothing for free. So you just destroyed the conversation. What we should be saying is strategic debt-free education based on the needs of American society. Whole different ring. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We have statistics that show us when you have.
Give me that again. Strategic.
Yeah. So what you need now is strategic debt-free education based on the needs of American society. So what I think the first things we need to make debt-free are for people who are going into graduate work where criminal justice and law enforcement are concerned.
I like that.
Prioritizing minority students, because we know that we need to see more of ourselves in these places. Strategic debt-free education would also go for healthcare workers. Why? Well, we do need more healthcare workers of color, because we know that disproportionately when Black people go to the hospital, they are less likely to be believed. How many died of COVID-19 because their symptoms weren't believed? We don't have those numbers yet, but I hope to be able to keep our eyes on that. Thirdly, we need strategic debt-free education for teachers. Now, if you have more teachers of color, we know that serves students of color better. So you're also helping what America needs. Healthcare workers were overburdened because we didn't reopen effectively. They are now going into a second wave without having gotten rested, without having financial recovery. And without having mental health recovery. They are overworked. And if we had more to pull on, we could be now having a much healthier healthcare system.
Yeah. So I mean, gosh, these are I think these are really good solutions. I'm looking at some of the comments here. Folks are really agreeing with the solutions that you are bringing forth. You just talked about teachers. And so I want to move into education.
Yes.
Our children are our future. And we have to keep them safe. We have to make sure they are getting the best information. We have to make sure that they are getting information that uplifts them. We have to make sure that they have the best resources. We have to make sure that our teachers are safe and have the best resources. Teachers often have a second job because they can't make ends meet, because our priorities say that we don't want to pay teachers because education doesn't seem to be a priority. We know that in communities that are underserved, they don't have the resources. Children don't have the things that other zip codes may have. And so it really bothers their educational matriculation. But then we also are tackling COVID-19 within our schools. Do we reopen? Do we do virtual? Do we do in person? I've talked to teachers a few weeks ago on this broadcast, and they are scared to go back into the classroom because they feel like they are at high risk. Kind of talk to us about your plan. You mentioned education is one of those linchpins to restore this country. What's your plan to attack the educational system?
Well, if you talk to educators, what they will tell you is that our education system is woefully outdated. We're still teaching on a rote system of learning. And you saw in COVID-19, what we needed most was critical thinking, creative thinking, and entrepreneurial thinking. We didn't have that. I think a part of when you look at restitution that needs to happen in African American communities, I think this would also help across the board, is I would love to see things like entrepreneurial charter schools in underserved communities, so that our kids are coming out now with an education that will actually serve them down the road. And those of you who are worried about reversed racism when you single out African Americans for these specific programs, if you're concerned about the economy, boosting the African American outcome in terms of economics, if you were to help more African American businesses specifically, if you were to help more African American homeowners specifically, you could greatly increase the GDP. So listen, there's whenever you help the underserved, everyone is served. I'm distracted a bit by a comment I see that I'll make sure we go back to. But in terms of education, one of the reforms that must happen is a reform to the Head Start program. It's not really giving our kids a head start if you talk to teachers. I think you also have to now reform the way we teach history. And I'm focused here.
That's what I was getting at.
I'm focused here on the African American aspect of things because I want people to understand how it helps us all. Right now, the way that we teach history, the African American narrative is limited to slavery, segregation, chronic poverty at best, Jim Crow laws. You think about psychologically what that does to children on both sides, white or black, if that's the only impression and idea you have of where Afro-Americans started and where they can go. The same way when I was in school, Damien, we learned about Asian dynasties, European kingdoms. We never learned about African dynasties, African kings and queens, African industry. We didn't learn that, the father of medicine was influenced by an Ethiopian mentor and teacher. We didn't learn those things. And I was blessed. My father taught these things, so we learned them in our home. And I know they greatly affected the way that I saw myself and saw others. So I think history reform in our schools in terms of curriculum. But I also think we have to shift some of that.
True history. Uh-huh.
True history. It's so, people like to say, well, that's African American history reform. No. History, teaching history broadly and correctly. And I also think one thing that we have to focus on now as we move forward in education is putting some more balance into the fact that everybody's not going to go to college. So we must be bolstering our vocational studies as well, take the stigma away from that. We needed hands on deck during this crisis. We needed more hands. And I think lastly, a really powerful, should have started with this, we have to pay our teachers a lot more.
Yeah, well, a lot more.
So people say, where are you going to get the money? Well, we spend a ton of money on standardized testing. You notice during COVID-19, nobody even mentioned a standardized test. Suddenly they were of no consequence whatsoever. What that tells me is we could shift some of the money we spend on testing into our teachers' salaries. You have teachers now. I don't care where they're teaching, whether they're in the suburbs. I know the president threatened not to have affordable housing in the suburbs. Well, what he just did was he undermined the needs of some of his own base. There are teachers, white as well, who are teaching in the suburbs and cannot afford to live where they're teach. There's no city in America right now where a single mom of 2 kids can afford rent on a minimum wage. No city in America.
I think it's shameful the way that we treat our teachers. I think it's awful and it's shameful. In the richest nation on this globe, and we are paying our teachers right at just an average living wage, although they spend more time with these children than their parents do. They are shaping the minds of our young people. They are creating the way that these young people will look at the world and how they will move through the world. They are working second jobs. They are sacrificing themselves. We even are having conversations. Should teachers have guns to protect themselves? We're having conversations. Should teachers go into the classroom and put themselves on the line for COVID-19? They deserve way more respect and way more money.
And support. So look at the issue we're going with. You don't even have to get into whether you think the school should reopen or not. Some schools are not having the choice. I've met parents who literally don't have the choice. We'll be keeping our kids home. But I know someone who says, listen, I'm not even, English isn't even my first language. So to keep my child home is a disservice for their education, because I literally cannot teach them. And they work a low wage job and they have to go to work. But here's what we should be saying is, don't threaten a school that says we believe it's best to keep our kids home, so we're going to take away that funding. Give them the funding to improve their distance learning capability. Yes, we know distance learning is not the best option, but it can be a better option if we help support them. If you meet parents who homeschool, they will say, what we just did in COVID-19 was not homeschooling. That was crisis schooling. But we now need runway to help parents and teachers be informed on how to navigate distance learning. You're going to have so many industries now that are having to figure out how to go virtual effectively. We did it in that kind of fast way and, Hail Mary, and everybody showed each other a lot of grace. But we now need the tools to do it effectively. And the schools who do reopen, my aunt is a principal, an acclaimed principal in Charleston, South Carolina. And she says they have not been given guidelines. She is figuring everything out on her own, ordering the plexiglass cubicles and the certain kinds of masks. They're figuring everything out.
Everybody's trying to figure it out on the fly. We've never faced anything like this. And so, I mean, I will say, I tip my hat to all the leaders who are in tough positions to try to figure this thing out. We've never seen anything like this before. There's no handbook, there's no playbook, but we have to make the best decisions. But it's very difficult.
It is. I wanted to refer back. I see a comment here from Bob where he says, stop breaking laws. Done.
Look, let me say this before you answer. Bob is a friend of the show, and we respect it. We respect everybody's view.
We do.
And Bob always has some very good questions for us to kind of wrestle with. So I appreciate you taking that question.
No, it's good, because I think these things must be. Bob, what's great now is if we allow it, we can have these difficult conversations. And instead of just being inflamed by what we see, we try to figure out what's really behind the question. And I think the context maybe that we don't, what I want people to understand is, I agree, stop breaking the law. Good, that's a great start. What we then have to follow through with is, when two people break the law, are they treated the same in terms of consequences, in terms of how things are responded to at the scene? And if the answer is no, we have to stop and figure that out. He's right, unions protect. Cops, unions are there to protect. We need balance now. Yes, workers should be protected. Their rights should be protected, but not to the point. How does it say? Your rights end where my rights begin. And so we just have to make sure now that things are fair, balanced, and equally distributed. The story is rare. I don't know if he's talking about the one with the cop beating up the other cops, or the crisis prevention scenario. And unfortunately, that crisis prevention scenario is rare. And my hope is that it become more common, that we see partnership between law enforcement, social work, psychological services, family services. We see more cooperation. I think it's premature and naive to talk about getting rid of police altogether. I think we're not with that conversation. There's a situation where you're setting yourselves up. And criminals are like, yes, let's do it. I love it. They're going to vote for that. It's about balance and it's about partnership, but it's also about not turning a blind eye. And I think we do, like I said, good cops a disservice when we turn a blind eye.
So we have some tough work to do, Jade, on a plethora of issues. This nation was founded on the free labor of those of African descent. This country was founded upon in its governing documents that Black persons were 3/5 of a human being. This country has been founded upon the oppression, Jim Crow laws, Black codes, all those different things to oppress a group of people and groups of people, not just Black folks, but also Hispanic brothers and sisters, as well as Native American brothers and sisters as well, and also Asian brothers and sisters as well. This country has been founded upon systematic oppression, right? And what has happened is the wealth gap in this country has widened, right? We have abject poverty. 30% of children are living in poverty. 20% of Black folks, 25% of Black folks are living in poverty, right? What is your plan? Because even now, COVID-19 has shut down businesses, as we talked about. Millions and millions and millions of Americans are now living off unemployment, and now I think that's coming to a close as we speak. What is your plan, Jay, to attack this issue of wealth inequality in this country?
I think you have to be serious about now helping people build a real pathway out of poverty. And I think the conversations we've been having have not helped us. When we assume that everybody who is poor because they want to be and don't want to pull themselves up, we do ourselves a disservice. When we assume that everybody who is rich and has something is evil because they do.
Right. I hate
it's demonization on both sides. Practically speaking, there are a couple things we can do right away. We have to raise the minimum wage. It's been $7.25 since 2009. And I always say, I don't own anything that I could still buy at the same price I bought it at 2009. Not my phone, not my car, not my house, not bread, not gas. So why would the minimum wage stay the same? We've been talking for years about getting it to $15. Well, here's what we do. We got a problem with 15. Overnight, take it to 10.
Yeah, if you take easily. That's an easy fix, right?
Easy. Then when you have 16 states that'll immediately see an increase in their minimum wage, because as people might not know, the federal minimum wage determines the low bar for all of the states. 13 states would immediately see an increase as well in terms of just being able to get above where they were. We are blessed that there are many states that are already above $10. In the first 2 years, I'd like to push Congress, which, by the way, they have been working on this for a long time. You have to, when everybody says they want something.
I know where you're going.
Everybody, you know where I'm going. Everybody says they want this. Everybody believes it's good. Yet it's still not happening. And there are two parties that have both been in office now since this minimum wage has been as low as it is. We have to ask ourselves if the two parties are all that different from each other when it comes to truly serving the American people. You have to ask the tough question. The second thing we have to look at is the disparity in the wage gap in these incredible American companies, right? So listen, I'm a believer in the American dream. But if you're building your American dream on the backs of American workers who are living below the poverty line, something is a problem. You should not ever have billion-dollar corporations that have workers on its roll that are living below the poverty line. You look at a corporation like, let's say, a Walmart, and I like some Walmart. Listen, I run into Walmart about a couple times a week. I don't hate on Walmart, but we now must require mutually beneficial relationships with these corporations. Walmart has a wealth gap of over 1,063 times. Their CEO gets paid 1,063 times more than its median wage worker. That tells us there's enough money now where the least they can do is make sure none of their workers are below the poverty line. And if that's something that's not done out of the goodwill of their hearts, I think we can look at taxes to tax companies that have the greatest disparity between that low wage worker and the CEO. And the greater the gap, the greater the tax. You can also incentivize that and say, listen, you can pay that to us in tax money, which we could turn around and put into better daycare, debt-free childcare. We could use that money for that. Or you could also give opportunities to the corporation themselves to close that gap on their own without facing the tax. But I think whoever we tax now, it can't be the middle class anymore, and it can't be poor people. We need to now spread that tax burden to corporations. I work for many corporations. My clients are corporations. So you're hearing someone who believes corporations are people. I don't believe corporations are evil. I believe corporations are doing what they need to do to make a profit, and profit has become king. We have to enter an era now. And I know the corporations where the CEOs prioritize their people. They make a great profit, but they care about their people. Those are the CEOs we need to be partnering with into the future.
Let me ask you this, as we talk about it, you made a great point. The minimum wage has been at $7.25 for 11, 12 years now. Yeah. So how, Jade, do we get to this place where Congress, 535 folks who have been elected and sworn to represent this country from all threats, foreign and domestic, and they will do everything they can to advance this country and to represent their respective constituents. How is it that we can't get to a place where because there are cities and municipalities that have increased the minimum wage, $10, $15 in some places. How is it that we have Congress persons who can't find common ground? I told you this country is so divided. And these are the folks we elect to be leaders, to be the grown-ups in the room. and to sit down at the table, to look each other in the eye, and to put aside their differences and to make good laws and good legislation that helps this country on behalf of the American people that sent them there. How do we get to that place where we can't even decide to give people more money? And we're so divided. What do we do?
I think you know that answer as the political consultant and strategist. Yeah, listen, so we're going to have to do something about lobbying.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do something about interests outside of the American people.
Special interest,
so if you say it with such incredulity, right? Listen, these are grown-ups. How could they not find common ground? It is a lie to think these people don't agree on a lot of things. They go out and have lunch with each other after posturing on TV to be on two different sides. Here's what we have to ask ourselves. In the stimulus bill that we saw, the first one, you mean to tell me none of those members of Congress caught that loophole for small businesses there, where not anybody saw that? They are too brilliant to have everybody on both sides forget or not see, which means it must serve somebody else for them to pretend not to have put the loophole in or pretend not to see it, which means that both sides have other interests that they serve first. I'm a small business owner with a lot less than 500 employees. That's the definition of a small business owner as per the loophole in that stimulus bill. So we saw Holiday Inn and Ruth Chris Steakhouse and universities get money that really should have gone to mom and pops who make less than $1 million in revenue. So in the new era and the paradigm shift ahead that I'm proposing, we know now that in times of crisis, the people at the bottom of the totem pole must be served, because that's who's going to generate as well that flow back into the economy. Someone asked about what we do going into the new year in response to COVID-19, the economic issues. One of the things that I propose, and the president proposes, a payroll tax cut, which is great if you have a job. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a job, it doesn't do you any good. So for the people who are not working, we need to look at a sales tax break holiday. Give people time to do more with the money they have in their hand. Give them time to extend that money until they're able to get new jobs. We talked about creating new jobs. I think we have a whole new potential industry called ongoing emergency preparation. Listen, the pandemic, whether we like it or not, may be around for a while. Yeah. And also other nations need to restock their storehouses. We should become the producer nation that is the manufacturing capital of the world, where China's coming to us, right? Vietnam's coming to us. Italy's coming to us.
That's one way to make America greater. Yeah.
Much greater. I think right now, great is overrated. If this is great, we got a lot of work to do. We talked off screen. Many love the president. They consider him fearless. I think we have to be careful not to confuse fearless and reckless. In this season now, we do need fearless leadership that's not afraid to make tough calls and tough decisions. But we must have the heart of a leader that has grace and compassion towards the people that it's serving. That's going to change everything, and we're excited to offer that as a solution.
I agree with you, folks. This is an incredible conversation with our dear sister Jade Simmons, running for president of the United States, in our great United States. She's been talking to folks all over this country. Native of South Carolina, has been shaped by the civil rights movement and leaders in the civil rights movement within her family. Been shaped by her experiences as well, and she wants to represent this country. We have more choices than just in Joe Biden and Trump. There are folks in the Green Party that are running as well, and
Libertarian Party, Joe Jorgensen's running.
Yeah, so folks, options are great. When you go into Walmart, you don't want to just see one product. You don't want to see just one type of lotion. You want to have options, lotion that you want to choose. And so options are best for the consumers to make the best decision for their family.
It's what a democracy is, isn't it, Damien? I mean, a democracy flourishes in an abundance of choices. We go over and lecture Europe back in the day about how to be more democratic, and we told them you must have as many viable options as possible on your ballots. And yet here, strategically, both parties work to make sure that you never hear a third voice. The Republican Democratic Party have a law-binding agreement to keep non-major parties off of the debate stage. That's a real thing. They don't agree on much, but they agree that it behooves them to make sure the American public does not believe they have other options.
Let me ask you this. You've never held political office before. I don't see that as a drawback in my view, because we all have different experiences that we bring to the table in terms of the leadership that we bring. And so that's not a distraction for me. But the folks watching, the folks across this country, folks who will see this broadcast later today when they get off work or whatever have you, they want to know, Jade, why are you the best choice?
Yeah. You think about what the president,
American people.
Excuse me. You think about what the company, which is the nation, if you think of it as a company, it needs a certain type of leadership. If you think of it as an organization, it needs a certain type of leadership. A few minutes ago, you painted a very bleak image of who we are and how we came to be as a nation. I, as an inspirationalist, see things, I see the reality of what you say, but I see the possibility. People think this is our darkest times. That means this is our moment to shine as bright as possible.
There's opportunity in Christ.
This is opportunity here. We've been given a great reset. When people see me, here's what I want them to think about the role of the president. Threefold: commander-in-chief, head of state, executor of the laws. Your commander-in-chief, you must know the root and the source of how they make their decisions. In an era where international affairs now, it doesn't feel like it, what's going on behind the scenes with China and Iran and Russia, if those two forces get together as they are planning right now, that is a serious strategic issue for the US. If a nuclear bomb goes off right now today, we're not going to remember COVID-19, and we'll probably forget George Floyd right about then. And we're going to need to be unified as a country. If you're our enemy watching us right now, we look pretty bad in terms of we're very easy to divide along obvious fault lines. So you must now have a commander-in-chief who is aware of what's going on, not only in the present with international affairs, but historically. We have to know the history of our relationship with China. We have to know that back in 2016, China went over to Iran very strategically and said, hey, we want to strike up a new relationship. Here we are in 2020. They just signed a deal together that strategically bumps the US out of things. And you think of Iran as our biggest agitator in the Middle East. China is our biggest competitor in terms of the economy. So those are things we have to keep our eyes on. And you have to know that your leader is making decisions not based on what makes the good headline. I said a while ago that the way that we took out Soleimani in Iran was not to our benefit. Not because Soleimani wasn't a bad man. He was. But the timing was off. Think about what was going on the ground in Iran. The Iranian people were consolidating against their own leaders. And what did we do? We went and unified them all over again in favor of their own. We could have allowed certain things to fester and to happen that would have benefited us geopolitically. But we now know that the president did not take information from his own advisors that said Soleimani wasn't the greatest threat at the time, but he chose to take him out because it made a better headline. We can't have a commander-in-chief that makes military moves based on what makes the best headline for re-election. Secondly, head of state, you must have a chief communicator. I am proud to be one of the most sought after keynote speakers in the nation. I speak all over the world to some of the most important and renowned organizations, corporations, and companies. They bring me in for one reason: to create on-the-spot transformation in their people, to help them navigate incredible times of crisis. And what else do we need right now? And you have to have someone that communicates not to instigate, but will also communicate powerfully. Joe Biden has been absent. This is not a season where we can have an absent leader. And I think also those of us who were considering to vote blue, ask yourself this: how much does it say about how people feel about you when they don't even feel they need to make their case from now until November? That they sit back and let the clock run out. We need to be asking hard questions. Lastly, executor of the laws. Everybody knows the president is not going to solve all your problems in your home. But what you want is a president that sets the tone and the atmosphere so that whatever is happening at the grassroots level, whatever is happening at the individual level, is supported and not oppressed or suppressed. You would also see under me a Department of Justice that would be a pretty fierce watchdog where civil rights is concerned. That's been watered down under the current president. And civil rights violations, human rights violations would be things that we'd keep an eye on. Sex trafficking, human trafficking would also be at the top of our goal list in terms of really becoming the leader in the world of prosecuting people who are constantly getting away with what we've allowed them to get away with. So it's a new era ahead that we're excited to really offer the American people. They won't see a term as mayor in my background, a term as governor. And it's not because I'm arrogant enough to think that only I can solve the problem. It's because I am daring enough to believe that this moment cries out for something different. And I am trusting enough to believe that the things that have got me to the point where I am in life will also help steer the nation in a powerful way. Lastly, I will say you're looking at someone who believes there's wisdom in an abundance of counselors. So you better believe I will be surrounding myself with America's best and brightest, and that the decisions I make will be hard fought. I'll be in the room with devil's advocates, people who do not believe like me, who see things differently, so that we can tussle. Every decision for the American people should be tussled over. If it's come too quickly, that means we haven't considered all the ramifications. So we're excited to offer a collaborative, creative, powerful leadership that combines toughness as well as compassion and grit.
You said a word a moment ago, Jay. You said daring.
Yeah.
Audacity. You know, audacity. You know, there's so many people in this country who've lost their sense of audacity.
Yeah.
People who have lost the sense of to be daring, who've lost the sense to be bold in their endeavors or whatever they want to do. You know, the poem says, "What happens to a dream deferred? It shrivels up." We allow life's challenges and the happenings of life to push us off course. And we're talking to a woman today who is focused on being daring to change this country, who is focused on being audacious to change this country and to change our communities. And so, listen, I've done a little bit over 70 interviews and conversations since March, since COVID-19 on this broadcast. And I'm gonna tell you something. This has been one of the better conversations. As I'm sitting here smirking, I'm smirking because I love what I'm hearing, right? I'm seeing someone who is articulating their vision for America in a way that I don't see it from a Joe Biden. I don't see it from.
This is a competition of visions, not personality. It also can't be a decision, Damien, made out of fear. The number one pushback we get is not people say what you just said. Man, I hear my heart and yours. That's my vision. But I'm afraid that socialism, or I'm afraid that guy's going to stay in office. And we say, can you just lead with what you want and what you desire?
Yeah. What's here? What's here?
What's here for the nation? What's in your heart? And then do your due diligence. People say it's too late. It's not too late. That's a false narrative. We saw in COVID-19, we had to make snap decisions about how to take care of our families. We saw government in 1 week, Republicans and Democrats work together to create the stimulus bill. Americans know how to make tough decisions in quick time frames. 100 days is a long time to make a solid decision. And so, you know, that audacity, you set me up great for a plug. I'm actually the author of a book called Audacious Prayers. Audacious Prayers. I blame it on him. He set me up. I could not take it. Audacious Prayers for World Changers. And when I wrote that book years ago, I was mostly making my career as a concert artist. And I thought to myself, why would anybody read a book on prayer by the pianist? Mm-hmm. But those are the questions we have to stop asking. We have to stop waiting for permission to do something unexpected. Because unexpected moments are coming, and disruption does not wait for an invitation. So nobody invited COVID-19. And so this is a season where we believe that this campaign, which we consider a movement and a ministry, if you want to be honest, we believe it also stands to spur others into their audacious action. You know, if we can't, and it also serves to expose our hypocrisy too as individuals. People will say, this can't be a time for gradualism. We can't have baby steps. And they'll say, you should have run for the PTA first. But wait a minute, you said no gradualism. You said, let's dive in and get this thing done. The reason, I'll end by saying, the reason I'm running for president, not for mayor, not for senator, not for governor, is not because I don't think that those positions are powerful and important. It's because the vision I can't shake, Damien, is a national one. The image that I see affects us on a national level. To execute what I see in my head on a city level would not do what it's supposed to do. So I believe a lot of the job of the president is to cast vision, to change the atmosphere and to set the tone. And I quite frankly can't imagine that being done to the level we need, to the degree we need, and at the temperature we need by either of the major party candidates. So we stand here boldly. Listen, we've been taking some hits. We've been getting some accusations, but we expected that. And I feel like, when you talk about what we're looking at now, this is really let the best vision win. And we just ask people, what's your vision for the nation? And let the best vision. There it is.
Competition is great. I just dropped your website down in the comments, and so folks, take a look at that website. You can learn more about Jade. But Jade, how can folks find you, get in touch with you, learn more about you?
Yeah, that's a long link there. Easiest way to get there is operationrestoration2020.com. That'll take you there as well. Facebook, we're Operation Restoration 2020, and Instagram is the same thing. I'm on Twitter at Jade Simmons. Don't be surprised. I try to respond. People are usually shocked that I respond, but I think it's important. People want to know not just who I am. I always say, don't get so caught up in who I am. Ask yourself, what is it I'm here to do for you? And if you come at me hard with questions, I just hope you're also coming at your preferred candidate in the same way. Don't let anyone be entitled to your vote. We tell people uncommonly, hold us accountable, ask us the hard questions, and demand answers so that you can know how to vote. And listen, I'm a proud Black woman, but do not vote for me because of that. Do not vote for me because I'm different. Do not vote for me because I'm not a politician. If you vote for us, vote because you believe that the vision of restoration that we have for this nation is the right one for this time.
Wow. Well, listen, folks, this conversation has really helped me to bring another option into my head as I prepare myself to go into the voting booth on November 3rd. And so I'm going to consider all options. I'm going to consider our dear sister Jade. I'm going to consider Mr. Biden. I'm going to consider Mr. Trump. I'm going to consider folks in the Libertarian Party and Green Party as well. I'm going to look at all options, and I'm going to compare visions. I'm going to compare platforms. I'm going to look at, and that's what we should do as we make decisions, as we decide what car we're going to buy, what food we're going to eat, so forth. So let's look at all of our options and make the best decision. Jade Simmons, this has been a great conversation. Folks, make sure you like this broadcast, share this broadcast for folks can watch and listen later. And if you enjoyed this information from Jade today, just put in the comments, thank you, Jade. Thank you so much for your leadership and joining us. We really, really appreciate it. We know that you are traveling a lot and you're going through a lot and you're handling a lot, and kudos to your family for also supporting you as you move through this tough venture. But you feel you've been inspired to do so to help our country. And what I call that is a patriot. And so thank you for your patriotism. Thank you for your leadership. And we really, really, really appreciate you. And until next time,
can I just thank you really quickly, because what people don't understand, the road of an independent is literally blocked by both parties, and the media is not a friendly source to independents. So people like you, Damien, are literally the reason Americans know about us. Independent media personalities such as yourself, who believe, if nothing else, your job is to tell the stories that exist. We've faced some major blatant shutdown from the media. So this is powerful. People should also know that what we're doing is viable. Already in 44 states now, you're going to be able to vote for me in one way or the other. So we've done our work.
Good.
We've filed out paperwork. Listen, we're not out here.
So you're not like Kanye, yeah.
Listen, you said it. But listen, here was our concern. We've been running since January. We didn't announce to the end of February because we wanted to make sure our paperwork went through and we had our path to the White House plotted out. We knew how many electors we needed to work. We thought there's no way the media will cover us if we haven't done our due diligence. And then we watched Mr. West announce his candidacy, and within 30 minutes of tweeting it, every major outlet had covered him. Yeah. Yes, because they understood or assumed he wasn't serious. They knew that we were, and literally did not want to disrupt the system that we have, the duopoly. So we owe the recognition that we do have from people like you. So thank you so much for finding it in you to make space for my voice and for our movement, which is Operation Restoration. Thank you so much.
For sure. No, thank you. We always want to tell the stories and inform our audience. We try to have an informed audience, not an emotional audience, but an informed and educated audience. So Jade, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you. Folks, thank you so much for joining us as well. And make sure you go to YouTube and subscribe to our broadcast. I'll continue to bring you more just one-on-one kind of broadcast of my thoughts on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe, and also go check that conversation out where I tell you exactly who Joe Biden is choosing for his vice presidential running mate. But until next time, folks, continue to live your life with intensity, integrity, and intelligence. Is the Damien Jones